Welcome back to What Your Pastor Really Thinks, a look at faith, theology, and culture. And today we're asking, is God dead? Is it dying? So it was a popular Time magazine cover back in the 60s, but guess what? It was popular enough for us to revisit it today. Pastor Matt Wolf, Arise Church, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm excited about this topic.
Absolutely. Pastor Drew Tarwater, Forefront Church, Denver.
Good to be with you guys.
If you were just listening, he just did like the 2-finger wave from the forehead. In case you're wondering what that was, that he did 3 fingers. I don't even know what
that means.
I don't have my gang signs figured out.
That's my Katniss Everdeen approach.
Oh, Pastor Ryan McBride, you can be our Rosetta Stone for what Drew is saying.
I like it.
Church, Canyon City.
I got it. He speaks in tongues. I'll interpret. Okay.
Fair enough. So today we're talking about, is Christianity dying? And what does that mean? We hear that all the time from, pop culture, magazines, news. And how do we respond as Christians to that? And like, what's the information actually really say? Pastor Matt Wolf, will you start us off with, is Christianity dying? And how would you define that?
Yeah, I think there's a general sense, especially, even people in churches, but in our country, it's this sense, well, hey, it's already happened in Europe and Canada. Christian churches are having less attendance, that there's just the whole faith is dwindling, dying, having less influence. Even 60 years ago, John Lennon, the famous Beatle frontman, once said in an interview, Christianity will go, it will vanish and shrink. I needn't argue about that. I'm right and will be proved right. Like here's the great prophet Lennon. But even more recently, there was an op-ed in the Huffington Post written by a Christian consultant. So this guy travels around to churches, and this is what he said. He said, I travel all over this country coaching religious leaders and consulting with congregations of every stripe imaginable. And there is one overarching conclusion to which I've come: Christianity is dying. So that's the sense. And if you are listening to this, I'm sure have seen a church that's dwindling. Maybe you've been in the church and you're like, man, there's less and less people every Sunday. It's smelling like, this place smelling like mold and dust. Like, do I want to be in this building anymore? A lot of church buildings are getting torn down. They're getting turned into other things like dental clinics, like a nightclub here in town. You can go to the church, grind on someone on the pulpit. Like what? And, I remember even Nebraska, there was one that got turned
into— Watch your ears, kids.
Yeah, there was, no, this is even worse. In Nebraska, there was one that got turned into an OBGYN clinic. So like you can put your legs up in the stirrups right there in the church. And that's what you're seeing. Oh, churches are just dying. Like that, especially this idea of Christianity, it's going the way of the dodo bird. It's going to diminish. It's going to be nothing. And I think there's just a general sense around that in our country, whether you're a churchgoer and your church is dying, or you're not a churchgoer and you're like, yeah, Christianity, like who cares? It's definitely old fashioned, old hat. That's how I was going to frame this conversation. That's the general sense that I get from a lot of people.
Pastor Drew, is that what you're seeing, or what are people like, what you've seen in culture and even people around you in your community?
Yeah, I've got some really great stats to share with you guys from Barna. But before we even get into that, I would say there definitely is this feeling, right, as Christian culture has changed, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, right? There was just this kind of Christian culture. And if you wanted to be an insurance agent or a politician or a business person, you went to church because that's how you made connections. Now, just the world has changed. Social media has changed much of that. And so people don't feel like they need to have that presence in a church. Used to be to get voted, you had to be a member of a church. Now you don't. And so I just think what you've seen is the rise of the nuns, right? You see this group that says, hey, we're not religiously affiliated. And I think what a lot of people go is they hear nuns, N-O-N-E-S, and they think, oh, these people who are atheists. No, actually, the statistics show that only about 4% of people today or 100 years ago are atheists. And so you have this rise of what's called the nuns, and it's the non-religious affiliated. And here's just a stat that Barna put together on this, is that if you look at 1998, you had about 12% of people who said, we are not religiously affiliated with any religion or denomination. And in 2020, that number jumped to 28%. So I think that's a lot of what we're feeling and sensing is just there's a larger group of people who now say, I'm not really plugged into a religion. However, the statistics do show that and we'll talk about this later, that they are religiously or spiritually interested. And so while there's a lot of negative news around that, less people going to church because they feel like they have to, there's some positive signs that we'll get to in a moment too. So it's really interesting, the kind of the cultural context we're living in.
Absolutely. Pastor Ryan McBride, especially being up there in the mountains, and what do you see out there? Is Christianity dying? Is it harder for churches? What do you see up there?
Yeah, I definitely think that the numbers have dwindled. If you just look back over the course of the last 20, 25 plus years or whatever. I think with the rise of like spiritualism, right? Like there's a lot of people who, in previous episode, we talked about, people disconnecting, for the summers and things like that. We're seeing that really kind of year round, where you get a lot of people who they're like, well, I can experience God in the mountains and I don't have to be in a church, in a seat together with others. I would say that Jesus would disagree with you. But we see that a lot of the mountains are my church or whatever. So we see this like this spiritualism type of a thing. Also, I think that like religion is the idea of religion to people is a real burden. So I still think that that the gospel is the hope of the world, and that we continue to preach Jesus crucified and resurrected, and that the gospel ultimately changes life, that religion doesn't change life, that spirituality doesn't change you, but that Jesus does. And so I think, like Drew said, there's a lot of people who are asking, this is the biggest question ever. Who is God? And what do I believe about him and his involvement in my life and the world around me? And so I think people that question is not going away. And I believe that we are still, God's plan A, to be the hope of the world, the church, speaking of the church. So that's kind of where we're at.
Matt, when you think about it on how church has changed over the last, say, 25 years, like when I grew up, I was born on Saturday and church on Sunday. You had Sunday school, then church, and you're basically at church for 3 hours, give or take, the whole morning. Now it seems like an hour in and out. Is the culture of the importance of church changing, thus changing the mindset of how people approach it and going? What do you think on that?
Yeah, it's definitely true. And it's interesting you said 25 years, because some of the statistics show that right around the turn of the century was when there was a pretty big shift somewhere in there. And just like, so the statistics, up until 2000, up until the year 2000, the membership level, so people who said, I'm a member of that church, and I know that doesn't necessarily mean you're a churchgoer or not, but the people who at least claimed it, membership of a church, was hovering around 70% all the way until 2000. And then it has dropped every year since then, and now is somewhere below 47%. So less than half the people in our country, when it used to be 7 out of 10. Attendance is the same way. We have kind of a short history of it in America, because it was really right after World War II where there's this enormous boom in our country in church going. Before that, it actually wasn't as high as we think traditionally. But right after World War II, every Sunday, 50% of our country was in a church. Now it's less than half that. So huge drop in percentage of people who are actually worshiping on a Sunday morning. And what's even crazier, and I haven't yet seen the statistics, I'm hoping Drew has some new data from this year, but in COVID, during that 2-3 year period that we call the pandemic, about a third of regular churchgoers who were previously churchgoers dropped. So that's even more, like in the last 5 years, a drop of actual church-going people. And with this, it is leading to issues with the churches, because if not enough people go, they're not giving. Therefore, there's not enough money to pay a pastor, keep the lights on in the building. So right now, it's about 6,000 churches that close their doors every year. And 3,500 Americans, get this, leave the church every single day.
Wow.
Yeah. So the statistics are, in one sense, it seems pretty bleak.
So, Drew, do you have some of those updated numbers and what it looks like in the last year or so?
I do. Yeah, here's what's interesting. So, Matt, you're talking about the early 2000s, the aughts. You see the iPhone came out in 2007. Since the iPhone came out in 07, so starting back in 08, you just see a huge rise in the nuns. So I do think there is some correlation between just the fact that in our hands now we have the ability to entertain ourselves, right? We don't have to be part of community anymore. Facebook had already been out. Instagram, MySpace, we're hitting the road. Not, I guess MySpace was out. So in 08, if you looked at the nuns, they were pretty much West Coast, a little bit of smattering on the Northeast, and a little bit in the Midwest. Now every state's got pretty much 35% or more of the population of people are nuns, except for the Bible Belt states in the Deep South, which is really interesting. But here's what's really interesting: if you look at religious attendance by gender and by birth year, the number that is most alarming is the Gen Z females. So here's what's interesting: there's really a spiritual awakening going on with Gen Z males, but Gen Z females, anybody the age of 18 through 24, more than a third of them are nuns. So more than a third of them have zero religious affiliation. But young males in Gen Z are really sparking. Check this. Listen to this stat. This one's really cool. So if you think about how the females are and the males are responding to just this idea of spiritual hunger, 60% of Gen Zs say that they are hungry for spiritual things. And you see this uptick where at one point in time, it was more women than men in church. And so if you go back to, say, 1980, you see a decline of men. Men in 1980, 37% of men were part of a church. By the year 2000, that number was down to like 33% and can steadily dropping, right? By the year 2020, these numbers start to change though, right? During COVID, females on the other hand, in 1940, we're going way back, right? 1940, only about 20% of women went to church, like Matt said, pre-World War II. You get to 1980, about 33% of women, and then that number continued to rise until COVID. And so you definitely see with COVID this change where people just fell out of rhythm and stopped going to church. People who said that religious faith was very important to them in their life, dropped immediately 4 to 5% when COVID hit. That was really interesting. But here's what's crazy. Listen to this. So in the year 2000 or in year 2020, about 60% of people surveyed said, yes, I have said yes to Jesus in my life. I have made a personal commitment to follow Christ. By 2021 and 22, that number had dropped from 59 to 54. But in 2025, that number is 66%. So you've got a 12% jump of people who have said they've trusted Jesus in the last 2 to 3 years. So there is some reason to believe that there is a spiritual awakening. Now here, check this out. Last stat I want to share with you guys about the Gen Z men. Christian identity. This is really interesting. People who self-identity, and I think this is driven much by young Gen Z men, but Christian identity in 2021 was 66%. This is just that big number that we always share, right? 66% of people said they are Christians. We know that number is flawed, but let's just still go with it. That number held steady till 2024. Since 2024, in the last year, that number's jumped to 74%, an 8% jump. And so there is something happening. So should we be worried about the numbers? For sure. Should we be excited that there is a spiritual awakening, especially in young men? Absolutely.
Yeah. Pastor Ryan, especially like with social media and the impacts of like devices and connectivity, how do you think that's impacting like church community and people saying, is Christianity dying? Where it's like They may not be showing up to the churches, but they're watching their favorite pastor on the other side of the country instead of being involved in their local church.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing. And I was thinking about that when Drew was talking about. I remember when the iPhone came out. I was playing. I lived in Missouri at the time, and they had a big air show concert festival, and I was in a band, and we opened for Rebecca St. James, and it was awesome. But our tech guy who was running our tech, he showed up all happy because he got the first edition. This would have been 2007 iPhone, and he was like going through. He was all excited. So I remember the day that they dropped, that it came out, and I've just been thinking about the development of technology and what's in our hands now, and the access that we have just by the swipe or the click of a button. It's just insane. And I do think that that's a big thing. I think in 2020, it was really interesting because almost overnight, I'd be curious to know that the percentage of churches that before COVID hit had a strong online presence. Because like literally overnight, everybody was forced to become an expert at streaming their services, getting their services online. And there was, like God bless, Life Church and some of the platforms that they made available for churches to do that with ease. And there were others too. But literally, I remember sitting there going, okay, I'm going to just hop on iMovie and edit this down and do stuff. And so like now everybody's online. And I think there's a good amount of churches that probably didn't see the value in continuing that after COVID kind of chilled out. And they said, no, we don't want people to, sit on their couch with no pants on and drinking coffee and watch it. We want them to come sit in the row with us. We want them to be.
You don't want me coming to your church, Ryan. That's fine.
Listen, our official dress code is please do. Put something on. If it's just your underwear, whatever, come meet Jesus, right? So, but I think a lot of people didn't see the value. The church leaders didn't see the value in continuing an online presence because they didn't want that to be an excuse for people to just stay home. We had those conversations. I know I had those conversations with a lot of buddies of mine are going to continue doing that. Ultimately, I think we can leverage that in a way that's meaningful and beneficial. And so we do continue to have an online service, but for sure, aside from those who are out of state on vacation here in Fremont County, we've got a lot, DOC, Department of Corrections, is our primary employer. And so we get a lot of people who their shift work. They have to work on Sundays. And so, but they can hop on and they can watch, or they can watch it back on demand. And so, but aside from that, we have a lot of people, hey, hopping on, doing church at home, from home today. And I'm like, it's cool. I'd love to see you here. Right. But it is what it is. But I do think, to answer your question, I think that the rise of technology is definitely adding to this. And, with celebrity pastors, like on, all over the place, people are like, well, if I can find someone who preaches better and the music's better, I'll just stay home and watch that instead of, as you mentioned, Rob, no, I'm going to go connect in because I see the value of giving, not just of my resources, but of my time and in the ways that God has gifted me. So I want to go be a blessing at a place instead of let's call it what it is. I'm just consuming from someone else's product on the other side of the states.
Yep. So the other side of the idea with is Christianity dying? I wanted to ask you guys is what about like maybe theology, maybe the big word for it, but like the Christian knowledge. People may claim Christ, but they don't know what the scriptures say. Like, how do we battle that? We go, is Christianity dying? Where like people claim Christ, but they also accept a lot of non-biblical ideas as their worldview. So how do we talk about that as Christianity is dying, and how, like, where's that correlate to it, Matt?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I know there are some people that research that, especially you can look at specific beliefs, like how many people actually believe in a literal place called hell, can believe in Satan, because you might call yourself a Christian, but you have all these other different beliefs. And that has always, I think, been an indicator of what's a little more accurate of what's going on. Some of it is like, we got to educate people. We got to teach people. Everybody has something to grow in their theology. Like right now, we know in part, Paul says, until we're in heaven, we'll know fully. So everybody has a little imperfect theology, as much as we want to say, like, we got it all figured out. So I think to a certain extent, that's okay. But I think what that also reveals is that there's a lot of believers who would say, I'm a Christian, but nothing in their thoughts, words, or action actually indicate that they're a follower of Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think that's always been the case. Now, I'm trying to think, like, historically what has happened in our country, like, as we're discussing this today. And in the 1950s, it was clear, like, a lot of guys went overseas, saw a ton of awful things.
Yeah.
And the guys that lived through it, like, what they say is there's no atheists in foxholes. There was a lot of people came back profoundly changed by what they had experienced overseas. And so that's why, for the first time in American history, there was this massive boom in church attendance. You know, there had been a few they called them the Great Awakenings before that, but nothing like 50% of people each Sunday in a church. And so those people, the greatest generation, raised their families to go to church. And it was like, we're going to do this because we have a sense of duty, because we're duty-bound people. We served our country. We gave our lives for this country. And it was this sense of duty. We've got to do it. And I've often heard that it said, like, the first generation believes, the second generation assumes, and the third generation denies. So I think that's kind of what has happened. The first generation, the greatest generation, they really did believe. That's why they were in church. Some of them had a sense of duty. I've just got to do it. I'm going to be there every week. I'm going to give my money. I'm going to serve no matter what. Then their kids, the baby boomers, they assumed, okay, yeah, it's probably true. Some of them legitimately had life transformation, but some of them, they got trained in that duty-bound mindset. I'm going to be at church and I'm going to be a part of it no matter what. I'm going to volunteer because of obligation. And so that generation has been around for a long time. But now the third generation, us millennials, like, deny it. Like, have so many have walked away because they're like, I don't know, like, they don't have the true, genuine encounter with God. And like, so are they truly Christians, even like those assumers? I don't know. The late Tim Keller talked a lot about how there was the mushy middle. Like, there was the true committed Christians, and there used to be the people who were completely anti-faith, but there was a big mushy middle in our country who were like, yeah, I kind of believe a little Buddhism, a little bit of Jesus. I like doing yoga too. And hell, that doesn't sound very good, so I'm not going to believe in that. And so this is the mushy middle. And what has happened is that mushy middle has been squeezed out. It really has. It's been squeezed out over the decades because nowadays we don't live in the positive culture that says, hey, you should go to church. You're going to get advanced in culture and society if you're a church member or whatever. Now it's like, oh, you go to church, you're one of those bad people. You believe in Jesus and you believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. You're actually harmful to people in our society. And because of that, there's no more mushy middle. Because in order to stand up for your faith and say, I am a believer in Jesus, now you get shot at. People do not like you. You're going to get ostracized in your schools. The professors will make fun of you in front of the entire class. So the mushy middle is gone. But I think what we're also seeing, as Drew is bringing up, now this fourth generation might be like the ones who are actually believing, like, there's no reason to pretend to be a Christian anymore. It's not a good thing for you. So I'm only going to say I'm a Christian if I really am a Christian. So therefore, there is like something real that's happening right now. We're seeing it right now, like with our 20-somethings and some of the teenagers, like, they are on fire for Jesus. And I'm really excited about it. I've probably said some stuff knocking Gen Z, but I'm like, wow, they are going to change something for the good in the church and in our culture and our society.
Yeah.
Pastor Drew, how's Gen Z and their change impacting what you guys are doing?
Yeah, I think the fact that there is a hunger creates opportunities to really engage. What I've noticed about Gen Z and millennial is that there is a hunger for spiritual truth. It does seem like older generations, Gen X, boomers, even older millennials, maybe, there was just kind of this feeling like, well, how does this bring value into my life? And it became this kind of routine. And then I think that's why you started to see just the millennial and Gen Z numbers decrease. Now you have this spiritual hunger that people want to know. They want to ask the hard questions. Mm-hmm. Man, Gen X used to say, well, people don't want to ask those questions. People don't want to talk about that. Gen Z does. Gen Z wants to know, hey, why do we believe in God? What do we see in the evidence? And so I do think there's a really big encouragement that people want to talk and ask the hard questions. And honestly, guys, I think one of the things, we're talking a lot about the iPhone, we're talking a lot about technology. I think one of the things that just we're really seeing here is this idea that we live in, we know we live in an affluent society, right? Well, young people now, right? Gen Z, millennial, they grew up with just so much convenience around them.
Yeah.
You know, Matt mentioned earlier, these guys come home from World War II. They come home from Vietnam. They come home from Korea. And man, I mean, that was hard. A lot of our youth, not all of them, but a lot of our youth grow up in convenience. And so really when you compare church growth and church decline statistics with the US for, say, Asia, what you see is huge differences. Like I was looking up some statistics in Asia. Let me just throw one out at you. I mean, this is really just so fascinating. The church in Asia, since the year 2000, in Asia overall, has grown just 1.5% every year over and over again. We got 100 million Christians in China right now. There's points where in Nepal, from 1970 to 2013, so we're talking 43 years, the church grew annually 11%. And so what you see, though, in Malaysia, 9.1%, in South Korea, 31% now consider themselves to be Christians. And these are often in environments that it's not affluent. Culturally, especially in China, you've got a communist government that holds down Christianity. So what you see in the church, especially you see this over the history of the church, where there is pressure against people, where people are not flourishing, there is the gospel just takes people by heart, and it just fans the flame because people recognize there's more to life than what we're experiencing. In America, we're so affluent and we have our phones in our hands. We're so digitally distracted. We miss the need for spiritual things. And so I think we can learn a lot from the Asian cultures. South America's booming. We can learn a lot from that. Seeing our need for God reminds me of the story of the rich young ruler, where the disciples say, well, man, Jesus says, well, if you're wealthy, it's going to be harder to enter the kingdom than a camel going through the eye of a needle. And the disciples say, well, then who can be saved? And Jesus says, with man, it's not possible. With God, all things are possible. I mean, he's talking about affluence and riches do blind us from our need of God. And I'm afraid a lot of what we're seeing in America over these last 25 years is the decline because of comfort. But there's something in the heart of the Gen Z, especially these Gen Z males, that say, hey, this comfort is not working. This appetite we have for digital content, and we're lonelier than ever now because social media really we went from 20% loneliness to 50 in our country. And so I think these young Gen Z men especially are saying there's more. And so I think as a church leaders, we've got to capitalize on that. Community, fellowship, truth. I think all that flows into how we have to adjust our teaching.
I think there's something about desperation, right? You talk about like, it just reminds me of the book of Judges, right? Where, and because let's be honest, like our culturally, globally, like we're in decline, right? And you think about the book of Judges where like things were good, and then the people, they'd become a little bit comfortable, and they were, intermarrying and intermixing with the cultures around them and things like that. And then and the culture was horrible. And then, God would give them over to, Moab or Canaan or Midian or, Philistines or whatever. And for, 8 years or 18 years or 20 years. And then they got to a place of desperation where they cried out to God, and then God would raise up and anoint a judge, and they would come in and things would change for a period of time until they got comfortable. And then they'd start, getting lax, and they'd start, being silly again and worshiping demon gods again. And then it was just like this vicious cycle. And I think that's just an old story, but a timeless issue, right? Like that's always going to happen, because the Bible doesn't just talk about what happened, but what always happens. And so I think we're going to just see these cycles over the course of our own history and our own culture.
As we wrap this up, guys, Pastor Matt, is Christianity dying? How do you approach that? Are you like now a hit at parties because you'll talk about religion? It's like, are you trying to bring it back up?
I don't know if I'm a hit at parties, that's for sure. But I think it is important to have a realistic perspective. Yes, A lot of churches are shutting down. A lot of people are leaving the faith, but there's also these great moments of hope, even in our own country. I love that Drew got us thinking about globally, because globally, like, Americans are the most ethnocentric people in the world. And I'm saying this to the liberal elites right now, to the secular people. You're probably not listening to this podcast, but I'm talking to you.
We want you to. We want you
Because
to.
they'll say things like Christianity is dying. Well, guess what? Only 12% of Christians in the world live in North America.
Mhm.
Less than 1/8 of the Christians in the world. In fact, a quarter live in Latin America and a quarter live in sub-Saharan Africa. So, and if you look in those places, the church is booming in Brazil, Nigeria, the Philippines. The church is exploding. Our president of Converge a few years, like last year, I think it was like, we're not going to send any more missionaries to the Philippines because they are so Christian that they're sending all these missionaries everywhere else. Like, they're evangelizing us now.
Yeah.
And we do. We have, a Filipino church here in Denver, and it's amazing. And so that's so cool. Even in Iran, where it's illegal, the church is blowing up right now in an amazing way. And that's why Christianity is actually still growing, 2.4 billion and counting, because God is on the move. And he's like, if you don't want to do it in your country, I'll do it somewhere else. And we are a part of that. And I would say that we're a part of Converge. All three of us are Converge churches. That's part of a movement, about 1,600 churches nationwide. And over the last decade, I think since 2014, so just over a decade, our network has grown from 1,200 to 1,600 churches. It also grew diverse from 22% non-white congregations to 42% non-white congregations. In the past just few years alone, like I think over 80 churches have been started. And worldwide, we're part of like networks like the Timothy Initiative, and there's been like 9,000 church planted over the last 2 years. Like, it's crazy what God is doing in certain pockets if you open up your eyes to the truth.
That's right.
Our church is growing. Like, I've been talking all over Denver. Everybody was seeing record numbers on Easter. Like, God is moving right now. If you'd open up your eyes and see it and realize, like, God is for sure not dead. Christianity is not dead at all. Like, Jesus rose from the dead. We're the living, breathing. We're going to take over this planet one day. So just wait.
That's right.
It's good.
Pastor Drew, as we wrap this up, encouraging words for those who, when they see all the headlines saying Christianity is dying or atheism is growing.
Yeah, I would just say don't believe what the media tries to tell you. I mean, they just want to try to spark. I'm not saying don't believe everything. I'm just saying, man, don't read a headline and think that you pull away the reality. And the truth is, since 2020, we see a huge bump in Gen Z men. We're seeing a huge bump in Gen Z teens. The nuns have plateaued and are decreasing. Bible sales, record Bible sales in the last 5 years. And I think there's a spiritual hunger where there are people just walking into churches wanting questions asked right now. And so, yeah, is there some fear? For sure. I know a lot of pastors are thinking, man, my church is declining, or the church in general is declining. What do we do? Lean into the reality that God is on the move. Yeah. And he's just called us to be faithful and to journey with him. God, like, as I love what Matt just said, God is moving and in beautiful ways. So let's keep going. Let's be faithful and let's trust Jesus to lead the way.
Absolutely.
Pastor Ryan, final thoughts. Is God dying? Christianity dying?
Nope. And I can't really top what those guys said, particularly Matt. I would just say, if you're a pastor watching this and you're really concerned about it, if you are a faithful, church attender and you're concerned about what you're seeing, use it as some motivation to activate, right? How are you loving, serving your community well? Not just your church community, but your community right where you're at. That if you want revival in your church, if you want revival in your community, start with yourself. Amen. And then see how you can join God on his mission where he's at work. Because I'm telling you, there is a tremendous mission field right underneath your nose. You don't have to hop on a plane and fly over an ocean. You can. It's not bad. But I promise you, I mean, here in Colorado, we're 92% of people who don't affiliate, aren't connected into a church. There's a tremendous mission field. So take that, run with it, be the flag bearer, and keep the mission of God moving forward. So
Absolutely. If you're a pastor or if you're just listening to this and you want to connect, reach out to us, rob@simpler.com. That's sympler.com. Love to get you connected with these guys or the guys that Converge. Any way we can get you connected. We encourage you. We love what you're doing. Keep preaching and teaching Jesus. So if you leave comments, let us know if you have questions. We're going to do another Q&A episode coming up in the near future with all the questions coming in. And so once again, like it, subscribe it, help us out, put a comment on there. Let us know what you think. So guys, thank you so much. Looking forward to the next one, What Your Pastor Really Thinks. And I'm Rob, I'm not the pastor. That's why I can respond to the comments on social media.